I want to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a while. This weird thing that the Amazing World of Gumball does, where it just, quietly, without any announcement, becomes a genuinely horrifying piece of television. Not scary in the way a horror movie is scary. Not even scary in the way a deliberately spooky cartoon is scary. Something slower. Something that kind of settles over you after the fact, once the episode is done, and you're lying there thinking about what you just watched. I've seen people talk about Gumball as a funny show, a creative show, a deeply weird show with its mixed animation styles and its surreal logic. All of that is true, but there's a category of Gumball episode that I think doesn't get discussed enough, and that's the episodes that function essentially as horror, that use the language of horror, the pacing of horror, the imagery of horror, while still technically being a children's cartoon. And the reason they work as well as they do, maybe even better than they would if they were just horror, is precisely because of the packaging. Because when something arrives in a brightly colored wrapper and then hands you something genuinely unsettling, there's an extra layer of wrongness to it that stays with you. So tonight, I want to walk through the horror episodes of Gumball, the ones nobody really talks about when people list the best episodes, the ones that slip past you if you're watching casually. And I want to look at what they're actually doing, why the horror works, and why this show, this incredibly odd Cartoon Network series about a blue cartoon cat and his goldfish brother, managed to do something with horror that a lot of actual horror properties never quite pull off. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you want. I'll be here. Let's start with something that's easier to ease into, the show itself, and what makes it such a strange vehicle for horror in the first place. The Amazing World of Gumball premiered on Cartoon Network in May 2011, created by a French animator named Ben Bocquelet, who was working at Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe at the time. Here's the origin story of the show that I find fascinating. Bocquelet had these rejected character designs from commercial work he'd done. Characters he'd created for advertisements that never went anywhere. And when Cartoon Network gave employees the opportunity to pitch their own ideas, he took all these orphaned characters and put them together in a school setting. The show is, on a fundamental level, a collection of misfit designs that weren't supposed to exist anywhere, crammed into a single universe and told to make it work. And that origin actually matters to understanding why the show looks the way it does. Because Gumball's visual identity isn't a style. It's a collision of styles. You've got 2D hand-drawn characters living alongside 3D CGI characters. You've got claymation and puppetry existing in the same hallways as characters who look like they walked out of a Flash animation. The town of Elmore has real photographic backgrounds, actual photographs of suburban spaces. And onto those real backgrounds, all these cartoon creatures are placed and told to live their lives. Some characters are simple geometric shapes. Some are highly detailed illustrations. Some are cut-out paper. Some are shadows. The show's aesthetic is the visual equivalent of a fever dream about animation itself. Now, for comedy purposes, this is incredible. The incongruity generates jokes constantly. But here's the thing nobody says out loud. That same incongruity, in the wrong context, is the visual language of a nightmare. When you're dreaming and something feels off, it's often because things that shouldn't exist together are existing together. The furniture is your childhood bedroom, but also somehow your office. The person has your friend's voice, but your teacher's face. Gumball's world is built on exactly that kind of wrongness, and the show is smart enough to know that sometimes you can lean into that wrongness and let it curdle into something genuinely disturbing. The horror episodes of Gumball don't announce themselves. They start the same way every other episode starts. Same intro, same music, same cheerful credits. And then they slowly, gradually, walk you somewhere else entirely. I want to start with The Void, because I think it's the foundational horror episode of the show. Season 3, Episode 12. And I want to be clear about something before I describe it. The Void is presented as a light mystery adventure episode. It's funny. It has jokes. But underneath the comedy, there is a genuinely terrifying premise that Gumball plays almost completely straight. The setup is this. Gumball and Darwin suddenly realize, with a jolt, that they haven't seen their classmate Molly in a very long time. Molly is a gray sauropod dinosaur, a long-necked dinosaur character who had been a recurring background presence in Season 1. They haven't seen her in what feels like forever. And the weird thing isn't just that she's gone, it's that they can't really remember her. They know she existed, but the memory is fuzzy, indistinct, like trying to remember a dream from 3 weeks ago. They bring this to Mr. Small, their hippie counselor teacher, and here's where the episode makes its first real horror move. Mr. Small doesn't dismiss the idea. He confirms it. He tells them that Elmore is not a normal place. He tells them that when the world makes a mistake, when someone or something is deemed wrong, or unnecessary, or boring, the world erases them, not kills them, erases them, removes them from reality, removes the memory of them from the minds of everyone who knew them, and deposits whatever remains into a place called the void. Read that back slowly, and tell me that's not one of the most quietly terrifying concepts ever placed in a children's cartoon. The world judges you. The world decides you're a mistake, and then the world simply removes you. And nobody remembers, nobody grieves, nobody even notices the gap you left, because the gap is sealed over so completely that it's as if you never existed at all. They go looking for Molly. They find the place where her treehouse used to be, and there's just nothing there. A gap, a fold in the world where the space she occupied has been sealed shut. They pry it open, and I think about how they pry it open, with their hands, like pulling apart a wound in reality itself. And they all fall through into the void. The void is, visually, one of the most unsettling spaces in the show. It's this TV static landscape, all black and white grain, and it's filled with things that have been erased. Old technology, forgotten inventions, bad ideas, and people. People who were considered mistakes, discarded from the world, existing in this gray static purgatory with no exit and no way to tell if anyone is coming for them. Molly has been there. Alone, in this static emptiness, for an entire season. She doesn't know how long. Time doesn't work properly there. They rescue her. They escape. And then, and this is the part that really gets under my skin, just as they're about to tell everyone about the void, about what they discovered, the void reaches back and takes something from them. Their tinfoil hats, which had been protecting their memories, get sucked back in through the closing portal. And they forget. All of them. They forget the void. They forget finding Molly. They forget everything. Molly is back in the real world. She's safe, but no one remembers why she was gone or what happened to her. The horror goes unwitnessed and unprocessed. The void wins, in a way. It doesn't get to keep Molly, but it does get to keep the knowledge of what it is. And the implicit suggestion, the thing the episode never quite says out loud, is that this has happened before, that there are other people in the void, that the world has been quietly erasing its mistakes for a very long time, and almost nobody knows. I think about this episode when I think about how we forget people, not dramatically, not with grief and mourning, but just quietly. Someone drifts out of your life. Years pass. You try to remember their face, and you can't quite get it. The world didn't erase them, obviously, but the feeling the episode is reaching for, the feeling that a person can just not be there anymore, and the absence barely registers, that's real. That's something we all know. And Gumball crystallized it into this cosmological horror about an active, intentional universe that throws away what it doesn't want. The Nobody is a direct continuation of the Void's mythology, in a way, because it introduces us to Rob, a character who escaped the Void and survived, but only barely, and not without cost. Season 3, Episode 36. And before we get into the horror mechanics, I need to explain something about Rob, because his story is one of the most quietly sad things in the show. Rob was a background character in Seasons 1 and 2. Not a background character in the sense that he appeared occasionally, more in the sense that he was scenery. He existed in the crowd. He had a name, but nobody remembered it. He was the character the show needed to fill out the school hallways, but never found a real purpose for. And then the show put him in the void. In the void, when Gumball and Darwin fall into that static wasteland and start looking around, Rob is there. He waves at them. They don't notice him. They find Molly, they rescue Molly, they leave. And Rob, the character who had been waiting in the background, his whole existence hoping someone would finally see him, watched the main characters walk right past him and save someone else. He eventually escapes on his own. But the void leaves marks. When he finally appears in The Nobody, he looks wrong. Not cartoon wrong or exaggerated wrong. Wrong in a way that reads as genuinely uncanny. Parts of his body are covered in TV static. The same static texture as the void itself. like the place he came from, is permanently fused to his skin. The static-covered parts of him glow faintly in the dark. And there's this visual effect where the static doesn't move with his body. It stays flat, two-dimensional, like a badly rendered texture map on a 3D model. His body moves, but the static stays put. He's a character who is visually two different things at once, and it's deeply uncomfortable to look at. The episode itself is structured like a home invasion thriller. The Wattersons notice things going missing around the house. Food disappearing. Objects rearranging. The feeling that someone has been in spaces they weren't supposed to be. Darwin and Gumball investigate and discover, with genuine horror, that they have a basement. A basement they've apparently had this whole time, but simply never noticed. And in that basement is Rob. Look, the home invasion genre works because of a very specific primal fear. The idea that your safe space has been compromised. That someone has been inside your home, your sanctuary, without your knowledge. That the place where you're supposed to be most protected is actually the place where you were most vulnerable. Gumball plays this straight. The reveal of Rob in the basement isn't played for laughs initially. It's played as a genuine discovery of intrusion. What makes the episode stranger and more interesting is what Rob actually wants. He doesn't want to hurt them. He just wants them to acknowledge him. He hid in their house because they're the main characters, the people the show revolves around. And on some level, he understood that if he could get close enough to them for long enough, they would eventually have to notice him. He's been living in their walls like the world's saddest ghost, scraping by, hoping. And when Gumball and Darwin finally do acknowledge him, when he finally gets to be seen, he doesn't know what to do with it. He ends up deciding to be their nemesis. Because at least that's a role. At least that way he has a purpose in the story. Rob becomes a villain, not out of malice, but out of desperation. The desperation of someone who needs to be part of the narrative, who needs to exist, who has spent so long being a nobody that he'll take any kind of identity the story will give him. I find the nobody scarier on the metafictional level than on the surface level. Yes, the home invasion stuff is creepy. Yes, Rob's corrupted appearance is unsettling. But what really gets me is the deeper idea that there are characters in this world who are defined by not mattering, who live in the margins of the story, overlooked, functionally invisible, until the accumulated weight of being ignored breaks something in them, and that the show is aware of this, and is using it intentionally as a horror premise. Now I want to talk about The Joy, because this one is a different kind of horror entirely. Season 3, Episode 4, and it is one of the most committed horror parody episodes of any cartoon I've seen, where the void and the nobody work through existential dread. The Joy is a straight genre exercise, a zombie apocalypse episode played with complete sincerity. The setup: Gumball and Darwin come to school on a Monday morning smiling, not just a little happy, ecstatic, radiating joy, so intense, it's unsettling. They hug Miss Simeon, their teacher, and she immediately starts feeling wrong, because the joy is contagious. Physical contact spreads it. And once you're infected, you can't stop smiling, can't stop laughing, can't stop wanting to hug more people. What makes this work as horror is entirely the framing. The episode is shot almost entirely through the lens of Principal Brown's camcorder, which Miss Simeon takes with her when she realizes she needs to document what's happening. It's found footage, and not winking found footage. Committed found footage with all the jitter and distortion and loss of control that comes with it. The camera work gets shakier as the episode progresses. Cuts happen at wrong moments. There are scenes where the camera is pointed at the floor or the ceiling, while we hear the chaos happening off-frame. Miss Simeon is our protagonist, and it's an interesting choice. She's normally a villain in the show, antagonistic, petty, deeply unpleasant. But here she's the last sane person in the building, the one who recognizes the threat, the one who has to figure out how to stop it. She's our Ripley. She's our final girl, except she's also kind of terrible, and that adds a layer of texture that most zombie apocalypse protagonists don't have. The visual language of the infected is perfect. When Joy gets someone, their face splits into this enormous, unnatural grin. Their eyes go wide and glassy. Their movements become jerky and overwhelming. They rush toward you not with aggression, but with arms wide open, wanting to share their happiness. And somehow that's worse. There's something deeply wrong about a threat that approaches you with love. It's the opposite of how danger is supposed to look. And it's exactly as disturbing as that sounds. Miss Simeon pieces together the cure, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She plays it from her office over the school PA system, and it works. The infected snap out of it. The episode resolves. But for about 10 minutes of runtime, The Joy is a completely earnest, found footage zombie survival episode with no apology and no winking at the camera. It just is what it is. And what it is scary. There's also something philosophically interesting baked into the premise that I keep coming back to. Joy as a disease. Happiness as something that spreads through contact, that overwhelms your rational mind, that makes you want to share it with everyone, and won't take no for an answer. There are real ways of thinking about certain emotional states. Mania, certain kinds of enthusiasm, the pressure to perform happiness in social situations, that rhyme with what the joy virus does. The episode isn't making a heavy-handed point about it, but it's there if you look. The Ghost is an early episode, Season 1, Episode 12, and it's a gentler kind of horror than what we've been discussing. But it earns its place in this conversation because of how matter-of-factly disturbing its central premise is. Carrie Kruger is one of the show's recurring characters, a ghost girl with a pale spectral appearance who floats and phases through objects and is, by her nature, unable to interact with the physical world. She can't eat, she can't touch things. She experiences the material world as an observer only, separated from it by her nature as a ghost. And in The Ghost, she asks Gumball if she can borrow his body. The possession mechanics in this episode are not played cute. When Carrie takes over Gumball's body, his head spins around. He hangs from the ceiling. He drools. His face goes slack in the way that faces go slack when they belong to someone else. And Carrie, inside, goes on a feeding binge. She eats everything she can find, because she hasn't been able to eat anything in however long she's been a ghost. And now, she has hands, and a mouth, and a stomach, and she's going to make up for lost time. This is body horror. Not in a graphic way, but conceptually. The idea that your body is not exclusively yours, that it can be occupied, that your physical self can be used by someone else's consciousness, while you are where exactly? Where does Gumball go when Carrie is in control? The episode doesn't quite explain this. You're presumably still in there somewhere, watching, unable to stop what's happening to your own hands and mouth and stomach. The episode also has a moment that stuck with me. Gumball, after multiple sessions of involuntary possession, is left significantly heavier than he started. All the food Carrie ate is weight his body carries. He can barely move. He's lying there, bloated, a victim of his own generosity, because he couldn't bring himself to say no. And there's something in that physical consequence, the body keeping score of what was done to it, that feels deeply true. Carrie's perspective adds another layer. She's not a villain. She's lonely and hungry and desperate for a kind of embodied experience she can't otherwise access. The possession is wrong, but her need is comprehensible. The horror of The Ghost doesn't have a villain. It has two people in a situation that has no clean solution, and the episode sits in that discomfort rather than resolving it neatly. The Halloween episode from Season 2 is one I think people are more familiar with, but I want to give it its due because it does something genuinely smart with horror. The setup. It's Halloween, and Carrie invites Gumball, Darwin, and Aeneas to come with her to a party. Not a Halloween party, an actual ghost party, in an actual haunted house, for actual undead beings who gather once a year, because Halloween is the one night the barrier between worlds thins enough for them to come back. Real ghosts. Real dead people. Carrie herself, as it turns out, is unusual among ghosts because she was born a ghost. She was never alive, which is why she can be seen by living people, unlike most of the attendees. To attend, they have to drink a potion, just one drop each, and Carrie emphasizes this very carefully, that temporarily makes them ghost-like enough to participate. And for a little while, it's wonderful. They're at this wild, otherworldly party filled with genuinely deceased characters from the show's history. And it's beautiful and strange, and exactly the kind of thing Gumball would find amazing. Then the time limit starts to approach. If they don't get back to their physical bodies before Halloween ends, they stay ghosts, permanently. The potion doesn't wear off. They just don't go back. And as midnight approaches, the party's mood shifts. The other ghosts, realizing what's at stake, start trying to use Gumball, Darwin, and Aeneas as vessels, as bodies to inhabit for one more night. Because these are real physical kids in a world where real physical kids are the rarest and most desirable thing. That shift from wonder to threat is expertly handled. The party that felt magical starts feeling like a trap. The guests who seemed friendly start seeming predatory, and the race to get back to their bodies, scattered somewhere in the haunted house, while genuine supernatural entities try to claim them, becomes legitimately tense. The episode works because it takes the holiday horror premise seriously. There are real stakes. The threat is real. The solution requires genuine effort and genuine fear. And the image of the 3 kids' lifeless bodies lying somewhere in that house, while the children themselves are running around as spirits trying to get back. There's something in that image that lands harder than most kids' cartoon peril. Here's the one I think about the most. The one that I think is the best horror episode the show ever did, if I had to pick. The Night, Season 4, Episode 31. The concept is simple. The moon watches over Elmore as its residents sleep and narrates their dreams. The moon is voiced by Sir Derek Jacobi, a stage and screen actor with the kind of voice that makes even mundane sentences sound weighted with significance. And the show leans into this completely. The moon's narration is gentle and a little detached, like someone observing life from a great distance, which is exactly what the moon does. The episode goes through the dreams of various characters, and this is where the horror lives, because it turns out that the dreams of cartoon characters are some of the most disturbing things you can put on children's television. Start with Anais. She's the young genius, the hyper-capable toddler who's always the most competent person in the room. In her dream, she and Daisy the donkey, her beloved stuffed animal, have switched places. Daisy is real and massive and dominant, and Anais is the toy, the doll, the thing that gets carried around and set down and squeezed and dragged. And Daisy is gleeful about it, sadistically, unnervingly gleeful, tormenting Anais throughout the dream with a wide smile that doesn't waver. Then, in the dream's final moment, Daisy turns to the audience and reveals that it's actually her dream, not Anais's. Daisy has been having this dream. Daisy has been fantasizing about this. I need you to sit with that for a second. A stuffed animal has been dreaming about this, which implies, in the show's logic, where everything is alive, that Daisy the donkey has desires, has a fantasy life, has been lying in Anais's arms, night after night, imagining the tables turned, imagining herself as the one with power. That is one of the most quietly disturbing revelations I can remember from a cartoon, and the show delivers it with the tone of a cute punchline. Carrie's dream is in there too. Carrie is a ghost. She lives in a world of shadows and cold and gray. Her nightmare is color. Her nightmare is joy. She dreams of being forced into a bright, warm, relentlessly cheerful landscape, surrounded by happiness she can't share and comfort she can't access. It's the episode inverting her normal existence into something that terrifies her. What a ghost fears is not darkness. It's the warmth she can never quite reach. And then there's the dream sequence for Hector, the enormous giant who lives on the outskirts of Elmore. Hector is so large that he can barely function in the town. He can't enter buildings, can't sit on furniture, can't do most of the things everyone else does, because he's simply too massive. His dream is that he's normal-sized, small, and his dream reaction is pure, unbridled joy. He runs through the world doing everything he's never been able to do, everything he's always watched others do while standing outside. It's wonderful. It's also heartbreaking, because you know the dream ends. You know he wakes up, and you know that the waking world is the nightmare for Hector, and the nightmare is the respite. The moon watches all of this with its distant, measured narration. Not cruel, not dismissive, just observational. The horror of the night isn't any single dream sequence. It's the accumulation of them. The way it shows you, one by one, the inner lives of these characters you thought you knew. The private terrors and private longings that they carry into sleep. It's the show saying, everyone has this. Everyone has a dream life that's running parallel to their waking one. And sometimes those dream lives are frightening in ways that say more about a person than anything they'd ever admit out loud. Sir Derek Jacobi's narration is worth dwelling on. He brings a gravitas to it that another actor might not. The moon talks about these dream fears the way you'd talk about the movement of the stars, as phenomena, as facts of nature, as things that simply are. There's no comfort in the narration, and no condescension. just the voice of something old and patient, watching the small sleeping creatures below, noting what they fear. It's the most philosophical horror the show ever did. And it worked so well, I think, precisely because the tone stayed gentle, even as the content got increasingly strange and dark. You never felt like the show was trying to disturb you. It was just showing you things honestly. That's almost scarier. Now let me talk about The Disaster and The Rerun, which function as a two-parter at the boundary between seasons 4 and 5, and which I think represent the show's most sustained meditation on horror as a genre. By this point in the show, Rob has been developed. He's found his role as Gumball's nemesis. He's tried various schemes and failed at most of them, but he's persisted, because what else can he do? His identity is built on this opposition. He needs Gumball to be his enemy as much as Gumball needs air to breathe. In The Disaster, Rob gets his hands on a universal remote control. Not a universal remote in the sense of one that controls multiple TVs. A universal remote in the most literal sense. A remote control that controls the universe. Reality itself. It has buttons for pause, play, fast forward, rewind, slow motion, subtitles. And Rob, who has spent the entire series being the least powerful person in any room, suddenly has more power than anyone. What he does with it is precisely calibrated to be as devastating as possible without being violent. He doesn't hurt anyone physically. He hurts them emotionally, surgically, with the kind of precision that only comes from having watched from the outside for a very long time. He knows exactly where the fault lines in the Watterson family run. He puts subtitles under Gumball that say things Gumball would never say. Things about Darwin, specifically. That Darwin is a burden. That the family would be better off without him. That he's just a pet. Just a glorified fish. Just something they adopted on a whim. Darwin reads these subtitles and believes them. Because why wouldn't he? Why would Gumball's words be wrong? He runs away. Then, Rob turns off Richard and Nicole's parental filters. Whatever emotional guardrails keep them from saying the worst things to each other. Whatever love functions as a buffer between irritation and cruelty, Rob removes it. And they say the things they'd never say. They fight in the real way, the ugly way, and it ends with them separating. And then the episode ends. It ends with the family torn apart. Darwin gone. Parents separated. Aeneas lost and crying somewhere she can't be found. Gumball alone in the ruins of his own life, surrounded by the wreckage Rob made. And then the screen goes to black and says, "To be continued." I remember watching this episode air and feeling genuinely unsettled in a way that most children's entertainment had never made me feel. Because the horror isn't supernatural and it's not violent. It's the horror of watching a family be precisely, deliberately, expertly destroyed. Rob knows what to take apart. He knows the structural weaknesses. And the remote gives him the power to exploit them perfectly. The rerun resolves it. Gumball is sent back to the beginning of the previous episode with full knowledge of what happened, and has to try to stop Rob, while Rob does everything again, and Gumball keeps making things worse in his attempts to fix them. The resolution involves Rob ultimately destroying the remote himself, because in a quiet moment of recognition, he and Gumball both understand that what Rob is doing is going to consume him. That revenge, that big, doesn't leave room for anything else. But here's the thing about the two-parter that I think gets undersold. The horror of The Disaster isn't defeated by the time travel. It's not undone. The things that almost happened, the words that almost got said, the family that almost fell apart, those possibilities now exist in the permanent record of what the universe contains. Rob found the fault lines. They're still there. The remote is gone, but the knowledge of what it found isn't. The meta-fictional horror of this two-parter, the use of rewind, the reversal through the episode's own credits, the literal rewinding through previous episodes as a visual device, is Gumball being honest about what it is. It's a show. The characters exist in episodes. The episodes can be rewound. Reality, for these characters, is something that can be manipulated from outside by someone with the right tools. And Rob, the character who escaped from the void, who understands better than anyone what it means to be a character the story doesn't fully account for, got hold of those tools. The Inquisition is the final episode of the entire series, and it is, without question, the most explicitly body horror episode the the show ever produced. It's the series finale in terms of broadcast order, and the creative team decided that the way to end everything was with something that looks like a horror film. The episode introduces Superintendent Evil, a live-action human, not a cartoon, not a 3D character, an actual filmed human being, who has come to Elmore Junior High to stamp out its cartoonish nature. He is dressed in a suit, he has an office, he has machines, and his mission is to transform the students and teachers of Elmore from cartoon characters into human beings. I want to stop here and think about what this means in the context of the show's mixed media aesthetic, because it's doing something philosophically loaded. The mixed animation styles in Gumball are its identity. They're what makes the world of Elmore feel like itself. Every character being a different style, from a different tradition, coexisting in the same photographic real-world backdrop. The superintendent's goal is to eliminate precisely that variety, to make everything human, to flatten all those different kinds of being into one. The transformation sequences are where the body horror lives. Masami, who is a 2D animated cloud girl with anime-style features, is put into a machine. The machine starts working on her, and what you see is the cartoon being peeled away. Her hand first, going from the soft, stylized cartoon hand to something that looks like a real human hand. Then her face, the top of her face, the cartoon features dissolving to reveal something underneath that has real eyes. Live-action eyes. Opening. Looking around. The face underneath the cartoon face, revealed like a bandage being pulled back. Terry is a paper character. Literally. She's drawn on paper. Her form is paper, and her face is drawn on. The superintendent erases her face. He erases it with an eraser, and her face, her paper face, goes blank. She's still there. She can still move. But she can't see, can't express, can't communicate. Her face is gone. And in her panic, blind, she stumbles and accidentally injures other characters. The horror of Terry's scene isn't just that it happens to her, it's that her suffering spreads outward because she can no longer navigate the world without the face she relied on. 15 characters are transformed throughout the episode. Each transformation is shown differently, reflecting the character's original animation style and what it means to lose it. The episode is asking, quietly but clearly, what it means to lose the thing that makes you, specifically you. What it means to be made into something more ordinary, more human, more recognizable, but at the cost of your original nature. The resolution is Gumball and Darwin running through the school doing chaotic, cartoonish, deeply weird things to each affected character. Absurdity as medicine. The cure for being forcibly made human is to be met with something so thoroughly, specifically cartoon, that it snaps the person back to themselves, which is a lovely idea. The specific selfhood of each character is their protection. The superintendent can't win against characters who are fully, completely what they are. But then, the ending. Rob is revealed to be behind the superintendent. Rob staged this whole thing. And at the very end, as the school starts to come apart around him, as the void begins to consume Elmore Junior High from the inside, Rob is hanging from a small piece of surviving floor as everything else collapses into the static gray, nothing below, and he falls. It's the final image of the series. Rob falling into the void. The character who escaped it once, who built his whole identity on that escape, consumed by it again at the end of everything. It's not triumphant. It's not resolved. It's not even clearly a defeat, because the show never comes back to tell you what happens next. He just falls. The screen goes dark. For a show about a blue cartoon cat, that's a genuinely unsettling way to end. There's a thread running through all of these episodes that I want to pull on, because I think it explains why Gumball's horror works better than it should. Better than a lot of dedicated horror properties manage. The horror in these episodes is almost always about identity, about what it means to exist, to be recognized, to matter. Rob's entire character arc is a horror story about a background character who refuses to be background anymore. The Void is a horror story about what happens to things the world decides don't deserve to exist. The Inquisition is a horror story about the erasure of individual identity in service of uniformity. The Ghost is a horror story about the borders of the self, about whose body is whose, and what happens when those borders are violated. Even the Night, which is gentler than the others, is a horror story about the secret inner lives that people carry, the fears and longings that are more real in some ways than anything they show the daylight world. This is sophisticated horror. This is the kind of horror that academic horror scholarship gets excited about. Horror that is really about psychology, about social dynamics, about identity and power, and what it means to be a self in a world that doesn't always have room for every self. And it's in a cartoon. A cartoon with clay characters and paper characters and 3D dinosaurs and a fish kid who doesn't own shoes. The mixed media aesthetic, which I mentioned at the start, is doing real work here. When Rob's body is covered in void static, when the place that tried to erase him is literally embedded in his skin, that's not just a visual design choice. It's the show using its own visual language to express something real about trauma. The thing that almost destroyed you, leaving its mark on you permanently, carrying the evidence of your own near erasure on your body in a way that glows in the dark. When Masami's cartoon hand dissolves to reveal a human hand underneath, the horror isn't about the human hand being inherently frightening. It's about the loss of the cartoon hand. It's about the disappearance of what she was. The show has spent years establishing a world where being a cloud, being a paper girl, being a fish, being a rectangle are all valid and complete and real ways of being. So when something threatens those ways of being, the threat is emotionally legible. You're not afraid of human hands. You're afraid of the loss of Masami. Dedicated horror has a harder time achieving this, I think, because it doesn't have the groundwork. Horror films often introduce characters specifically to be in danger, and we're aware of that as an audience. The jeopardy feels constructed. But Gumball spent seasons making you care about these characters as characters, and then it put them in genuine peril. The caring was real before the horror arrived, and that makes the horror land differently. I want to talk about the Halloween episode one more time, but from a different angle, because there's something in Carrie's position in that episode that I find genuinely moving and a little haunting. Carrie, as I mentioned, is unique among ghosts in being born that way, rather than dying into it. She's never been alive. She's never experienced the physical world from the inside. The party she takes Gumball and Darwin to is a party for ghosts who had lives, who died, who now return once a year for one night of reconnection with the material world. Carrie can come to the party and observe, but she's not really the same as anyone else there. The ghosts who died had something. They had embodied existence. They remember what food tastes like, and what warmth feels like, and what it is to be present in a body in the world. Carrie has never had any of that. So when she invites Gumball and Darwin and Aeneas, 3 living kids in physical bodies, to this party, there's a subtext to it. She wants them to see her world. She also wants, maybe, for them to understand something about her. She lives at the intersection of the living and the dead, but belongs fully to neither. She can be seen by living people, which makes her unusual among ghosts. But she can't fully participate in living. She can haunt, but not hold, observe, but not eat, be present, but not touch. The horror of the Halloween episode, the ghosts trying to use the children's bodies, the race to get back before midnight, is real and scary, but underneath it is this quieter horror. Carrie has been living this way her whole existence. The danger the kids face for one Halloween night is Carrie's permanent condition. She is always on the wrong side of the barrier. She is always unable to fully access the world she observes. And she doesn't talk about this. She's not a tragic character in the show's day-to-day. She's funny and dry and sardonic. She has friends. She has a full life, such as it is. But the Halloween episode shows you, briefly, what that life costs her. It shows you the things she doesn't have and can never have and navigated every single day of her existence without having. That's horror of a different kind. The sustained, quiet horror of an absence that never resolves. The grieving deserves mention in this conversation, even though it's not a real episode, because it represents something important about Gumball's cultural footprint in the horror space. The grieving is a creepypasta. a piece of internet horror fiction written by a user called Globaluna32 and posted to creepypasta forums. It describes a fictional lost episode of Gumball in which Gumball dies by suicide, and the episode follows the family and friends grieving his death, with increasingly dark and graphic content as it progresses. It's not an especially sophisticated piece of horror writing, as creepypastas go, but it became enormously popular within Gumball fandom and spread widely enough that the show's creators became aware of it. What I find interesting about The Grieving is not the creepypasta itself, but what its existence says about Gumball. The show had clearly created a universe rich enough and characters compelling enough that people wanted to explore horror dimensions of it. They wanted to know what grief looks like in Elmore. They wanted to see what the show's cheerful, mixed media aesthetic would do when pressed into service for something genuinely devastating. The creepypasta is, in its way, a kind of tribute. A recognition that this is a world with enough emotional depth to sustain real darkness. The show actually acknowledged the creepypasta in The Compilation, a clip show episode in Season 4 that teased viewers with warnings and build-up that The Grieving was coming, before delivering a comedic deflation of the whole thing. The creators were aware. They thought it was funny enough to reference directly, which means that at some point in the production of Gumball, someone sat down and read The Grieving, and decided it was culturally significant enough to acknowledge. That's a remarkable thing for a children's cartoon to do. It's the show winking at the horror tradition it had inadvertently created. It's the show saying, yes, we know. We know what people see in us. We know what this world looks like in the dark. Let me tell you about the night one more time, because there's a dream I skipped, and I think it might be the most disturbing thing in the whole episode. Terry, the paper girl whose face gets erased in the Inquisition, appears in the night as well. Her nightmare is that she's at school naked, which sounds like the most mundane anxiety dream in the world. Everyone has the naked at school dream. It's practically a cliche, but Terry is made of paper. She's literally drawn on. So when she's naked at school in her dream, what that means for her, what she does about it is that she draws on herself. She draws clothes directly onto her paper body. She draws in her sleep, her hand moving across her surface, creating the covering she needs. The image of Terry drawing on herself while she sleeps is deeply strange. It's creative and resourceful, absolutely. It's also deeply human in its ingenuity, but there's something about it that gets under the skin. The way she's adding to herself, the way her body is, in a sense, incomplete without the constant act of creation. She's a character who needs to keep making herself. And then, of course, you think about what happens to her in the Inquisition when someone else erases her. And you realize that the horror of that moment is completely specific to who Terry is and what she's made of. Any other character could survive having their face removed in some generic way. But for Terry, it's a violation of the fundamental act of her existence. She is drawn. She has always been drawn. And someone erased the drawing. The show maintained this kind of coherence across seasons. The character-specific texture of fear, the way each character's horror is tailored to what makes them specifically themselves, is what separates Gumball's horror from generic cartoon peril. These aren't characters having generically bad things happen to them. These are characters having the specifically terrible things that apply to their specific natures happen to them. And that requires the show to know its characters deeply, to have thought about what they're made of in the most literal sense. Now, I want to think about why this works. Why does Gumball's horror work better than dedicated horror cartoons? Because this is actually a real phenomenon. Shows specifically designed to be scary, shows aimed at kids that market themselves on their horror content, often produce something that feels less genuinely frightening than a single episode of Gumball. Why? Part of it is expectation. When you sit down with something that has announced itself as horror, you have your defenses up. You know something scary is coming. You're watching for it. Your nervous system is primed to receive a threat and process it appropriately. The show can hit you, but it's hitting someone who's ready to be hit. Gumball doesn't announce itself. It comes in as a comedy, as a light, bright, cheerful, animated adventure with an 11-year-old protagonist and a fish brother and a cartoon balloon rabbit mother. You're not braced. And when the show walks you somewhere dark, it walks you there the way a friendly guide walks you somewhere dangerous, with a cheerful expression and a hand on your shoulder, and then suddenly, you look up and there's the edge of a cliff. The other thing is, and I've thought about this for a while, I think the horror in Gumball works because the show genuinely likes its characters. There's affection in these stories, even the dark ones. Rob's story is a horror story, but it's also a story about someone who desperately needs to matter, and the show takes that need seriously. The void is terrifying, but the show treats the people inside it, Molly, Rob, the accumulated cast of erased things, with dignity. The horror is not contemptuous of its subjects. A lot of horror content, especially horror aimed at children, creates horror by putting characters in danger and then resolving the danger quickly. The characters are pegs to hang scares on. They're not really people. Gumball's horror comes from the opposite direction, from caring about these characters so much that their specific vulnerabilities become legible, and from following those vulnerabilities to their logical and emotional conclusions. There's another episode I should mention here that doesn't always make the horror lists, but absolutely belongs in this conversation. The dream sequences in The Night include a moment with Banana Joe that seems like comedy, but lands somewhere stranger if you let it sit. Banana Joe, one of the most reliably comic relief characters in the show, a banana who laughs at everything and has a kind of cheerful obliviousness to most situations, has a dream where he's trying to catch his own rear end. His rear end is running away from him. And then he splits into two bananas. One of them has two faces. The other one has two rear ends. And the two-faced banana starts chasing the two rear-ended banana. Okay, that's bizarre. That's deeply, genuinely bizarre in a way that comedy doesn't fully explain. That's the dream logic of someone who has a profoundly unstable relationship with their own body, whose sense of self is so fragmented in the unconscious mind that they literally split in two, that their face multiplies, that the chasing and the being chased are both versions of themselves. Banana Joe is the character who seems to have no interior life, who seems to exist entirely on the surface, and his nightmare is existential fragmentation, self-pursuit, the parts of himself chasing each other. I'm probably reading too much into Banana Joe's dream, or maybe I'm not. Maybe that's exactly what the writers put there. Maybe the joke is the dream content, and the horror is what the dream implies about the dreamer. Maybe that's the whole game. Let me talk about the aesthetic dimension of the horror more directly, because I keep coming back to the mixed media thing, and I want to explain why I think it's so central. Horror, as a genre, has always been interested in wrongness, in things that are off, in the uncanny, Freud's concept of the Heimlich becoming unheimlich, the familiar becoming unfamiliar, the comfortable becoming threatening. The uncanny is why clowns are scary, why dolls are scary, why mannequins are scary. They look human, but they're not quite human. And that gap between the appearance and the reality is where the fear lives. Gumball's entire visual world is built on that gap. Characters who look like cartoons, but have real photographic environments around them. Characters who look like paper, but cast shadows. Characters who look like they were drawn with different tools by different people from different traditions, all existing in the same space. Every frame of the show is, on some level, uncanny. Things that don't quite belong together, coexisting anyway. When the show deploys horror, it doesn't need to do much to tip the uncanniness into genuine disturbance. It just needs to let the existing wrongness of its visual world breathe a little. The TV static texture on Rob's skin is disturbing, not because static is inherently disturbing, but because it breaks the logic of his character design in a way that makes you aware, suddenly, that character designs have logic, that the wrongness has been imposed on him from outside, that he carries evidence of the place that broke him. Masami's live-action eyes appearing inside her cartoon face work, because the show has established what cartoon faces look like. You've spent seasons looking at cartoon faces. You know what they're supposed to be. And then something else appears inside the cartoon face. Something that was photographed rather than drawn. And the gap between the two visual registers makes your brain feel the wrongness physically. This is a technique available to Gumball that no other cartoon and no live-action horror property can quite replicate, because Gumball is the only thing that exists in both worlds simultaneously. It has the cartoon softness and the photographic reality. It can move between them. It can let one contaminate the other. It can show you a face and then show you a different face inside that face. And because both registers have been normalized for the viewer over years of watching, both feel real. The intrusion of one into the other is visceral in a way that can't be faked. The disaster uses the remote control as a horror device in a way that's worth unpacking a little more, because the specific functions of the remote are doing thematic work. The rewind function, the ability to go back in time, to replay events, to undo things, sounds like pure power, but in the context of the episode, it's revealed as something more complicated. Rob uses rewind to revisit moments and manipulate them differently. Gumball uses rewind to try to fix things and keep making them worse. The rewind function doesn't give you a clean second chance. It gives you the same situation again, with the same variables and the same people. And it turns out that if you approach the same situation the same way, you get the same results. Time rewound is not time healed. The subtitles function is the one that haunts me most. Rob uses subtitles to put words in Gumball's mouth that Darwin reads as real. And what those subtitles say, the specific wounds they inflict, are the insecurities Darwin already carries. He doesn't need to be told something he doesn't already fear. He just needs to see it confirmed. The subtitles tell Darwin what he already suspects about himself. And that's all it takes for him to believe they're real. There's no horror more effective than the horror of your own darkest fears about yourself being spoken out loud by someone else. The subtitles don't say anything new. They just give Darwin's existing insecurities a voice that appears to come from the person he trusts most. That's a remarkably sophisticated understanding of how psychological damage works, and it's operating in the final episode of a season of a children's cartoon on Cartoon Network. I want to end with something about what Gumball does with horror that I think is its most quietly radical move, and then let you go to sleep. Most horror ends with resolution. The monster is defeated. The haunting is exorcised. The threat is neutralized. Horror is, in this way, paradoxically comforting. It creates danger in order to overcome it, and the overcoming produces catharsis. You're scared, and then you're safe, and the transition from scared to safe feels like relief. Gumball's horror often doesn't resolve, or it resolves on the surface while leaving the underlying wrongness untouched. Molly is rescued from the void, but the void still exists, still operates, and no one remembers what was learned. Rob is acknowledged by the people who ignored him, but the acknowledgement sends him into villainy because he doesn't know how else to exist. The remote is destroyed, but the possibilities it revealed are permanent. Masami and the others are turned back into cartoons, but the show ends with Rob falling into the void. This is horror that respects its own implications. It doesn't tie everything up in a neat emotional package, because the things it's exploring don't tie up neatly. Identity, erasure, belonging, the fear of being forgotten. These aren't problems with solutions. They're conditions of being alive, or of being anything at all. The horror episodes of Gumball are honest about this. They let the fear mean something without always providing the comfort of its defeat. That's why these episodes stay with you. Not because they frightened you and then let you off the hook, but because they put their fingers on something real, something about what it means to exist, and to be seen, and to matter in a world that isn't always paying attention, and they didn't pretend that feeling goes away. There's one more thing I want to sit with before we close out tonight. The show is over. The Amazing World of Gumball ended in 2019. The series finale was The Inquisition, with Rob falling into the void. And since then, the show has existed in reruns and streaming, and a whole generation of kids has grown up with it. And many of them have become the kind of adults who make videos like this, who want to go back and look at the thing they grew up with and try to understand what it was really doing. I think the horror episodes of Gumball are part of why the show persists in cultural memory the way it does. The comedy is wonderful, but comedy dates. Timing changes. Jokes that land perfectly in 2014 sometimes need context by 2026. But horror, the specific kind of horror Gumball was doing, horror rooted in identity and erasure and the fear of not mattering, doesn't date the same way. Those fears are perennial. The specific shape the show gave them is permanent. Rob's static scarred skin carries permanent exile from embodiment. The void that erases mistakes and takes the memory of them with it. These images don't lose their charge. There's a question I keep coming back to, lying in bed in the small hours, and I don't have an answer for it, which is part of why I keep coming back to it. The show built a world where some things get erased, where the universe actively decides something is a mistake and removes it. And the show's response to this, through characters like Gumball and Darwin and Rob and Molly, is always stubbornly to resist erasure, to insist on existing, to find a way to matter, even when the world isn't paying attention. But here's the thing. The show itself ended. The world of Elmore, all those characters, all those different animation styles coexisting, all those lives being lived in that weird photographic suburban space, is gone now, or at least paused. Elmore Junior High is quiet. The void is still there, probably, still accepting new residents. Are the characters in it? Are they safe in reruns? In the permanent record of what was broadcast? Or is there some sense in which a show that ends is a show that gets erased? I don't know. I don't know what it means for fictional characters when their story stops being told. Maybe they're fine. Maybe they just stay wherever they were when the credits rolled. Maybe Gumball is still at school right now, in some sense, still getting into trouble, still working things out. Or maybe the void is bigger than we think. Maybe it doesn't just take the mistakes. Maybe it waits for everything eventually, patient and static and gray. And maybe the thing that keeps you out of it, the thing that keeps you real, keeps you from being erased, is someone still telling your story, someone still watching, someone still remembering. Which means every time someone makes a video like this, or talks about these episodes, or thinks about Rob hanging from that last piece of floor before he falls, maybe that's the resistance. Maybe that's the tinfoil hat. Maybe that's what keeps the void from getting to close. I don't know. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. Actually, wait. Before I let you go, I want to keep talking, because I started something there at the end, and I don't feel done with it. The question of what keeps something real. What keeps something from being erased? And I want to follow that thread through some more of what these episodes are doing, because I don't think I've been quite fair to all of them yet. I haven't given The Joy enough credit, and I want to come back to the Aeneas dream from The Night, because there's something in it I skipped. And I want to talk about the show's sense of humor about its own horror, which is something that actually matters a lot to how these episodes land. So stay with me a little longer. Let the voice carry you. That's the whole point of this kind of video, isn't it? The words are something to hold on to while you drift. Let me go back to The Joy and give it what it deserves. When I described it earlier, I said it was a zombie apocalypse episode played with complete sincerity, and that's true, but I don't think I captured what makes it singular. The thing that separates The Joy from a straight zombie parody is the way it uses Miss Simeon. Because Miss Simeon is not a sympathetic character in the show. She's Gumball's nemesis in the school setting. His teacher, yes, but also someone who actively dislikes him. Someone who has been trying to get him expelled, or humiliated, or just sufficiently miserable for the entire run of the series. She's petty. She's vindictive. She's the show's most reliable antagonist in an episodic sense. And The Joy puts her in the role of the protagonist, the survivor, the one who has to save everyone. This is important because zombie horror and found footage horror works partly through identification. You need someone to attach to. You need someone whose survival you're rooting for. And Gumball did something bold, which was to give us a protagonist we don't entirely like, and then ask us to root for her anyway. Because the threat is real, regardless of how we feel about Miss Simeon. The Joy virus doesn't care about her personality. The infected students coming at her with their enormous grins and their outstretched arms don't care whether she's been a good teacher or a bad one. They just want to hug her. They just want to share. And Miss Simeon fights. She's not a coward, whatever else she is. She picks up the camera and she documents what she's seeing because she knows someone needs to, and she's the only one left who isn't infected. She goes methodically through the building. She assesses. She tries things. She uses the scientific method in the middle of a zombie apocalypse because she's a teacher, and that's the tool she has. The cure she finds, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, she finds by piecing together evidence. She does the work. There's something almost moving about watching Miss Simeon be competent under pressure, not in spite of her unpleasantness, but alongside it. She doesn't become a good person because of the crisis. She stays exactly who she is. And who she is, it turns out, includes someone capable of doing what needs to be done when things get genuinely terrible. The Moonlight Sonata choice is interesting too. That piece of music, Beethoven, first movement, the slow and melancholy one, is used in popular culture as shorthand for a particular kind of sadness, a quiet, private grief. It's the music of coming down from something, of resting after emotion. Against the manic, bouncing, overpowering joy virus, it's the antidote because it's the opposite. Not negative emotion, necessarily, but an emotion that has weight and stillness. The joy virus is all energy with no center, all outward pressure, all compulsive sharing. The Moonlight Sonata is the opposite. It's inward. It's contained. It asks the listener to sit down, to be quiet, to feel something that doesn't need to spread. The found footage format deserves more than I gave it. Found footage horror works because of the illusion of documentation. The implication that what you're watching is real footage of a real event rather than staged narrative. The camera wobbles. It points at the floor. It catches things you weren't supposed to see. The edit is messy. All of this signals. This was not planned. This is evidence. In the joy, the camera Miss Simeon is using belongs to Principal Brown. She took it from his office. And the footage she captures, the grinning, hugging, joyful swarm of infected students and teachers, is footage that exists in the show's world. Miss Simeon made a documentary. In the logic of the episode, this footage exists somewhere, probably in the school's archives or Principal Brown's office, or wherever he keeps his camcorder tapes. It's a record. I like that thought. That somewhere in the world of Elmore, there exists a documented record of the joy outbreak. That Miss Simeon's apocalyptic log is preserved somewhere. The evidence of how close the school came to being entirely consumed by compulsive happiness. That future students of Elmore Junior High might someday find that tape and watch it and not quite believe it. One more thing about the nobody before I move on. Because I said it's a home invasion episode, and that's true, but there's a level of it I didn't quite get to. Rob hiding in the Wattersons' basement isn't just creepy because someone is in the house without permission. It's creepy for a reason specific to the Wattersons, which is that their house has a basement they never knew about. The basement existed, they just never found it. And they never found it because the show never gave them a reason to know about it. And the show never gave them a reason because Rob hadn't appeared yet. And Rob hadn't appeared yet because he was in the void. Think about what this implies. The architecture of the Wattersons' home, the literal physical structure of the place where they live, has spaces that don't exist until the narrative needs them. The basement wasn't there, and then it was, because someone had to be living in it. This is the show being explicit about its own fictional nature in a horror context. The house has rooms because rooms are needed. Reality in Elmore is constructed around narrative necessity. And Rob, the character who escaped from the void, who was dumped there because he was an unnecessary character, Rob found the basement. Rob found the room that existed because he needed to exist somewhere. The void tried to throw him away, and he came back and hid in the margins of the main characters' lives in a literal architectural blind spot that existence created to accommodate him. That's beautiful and weird and a little heartbreaking. He found himself a room in the story by going to the part of the story nobody was looking at. He made himself a home in the place nobody knew was there. I want to think about the disaster from Rob's perspective for a moment, because I think we usually read that episode as being about Gumball's family in danger, and it is, but it's also about Rob. By the time the disaster happens, Rob has been the show's nominal villain for a couple of seasons. He's tried things. He's failed at them. He's comically inept as a nemesis, and the show has made gentle fun of his attempts to be threatening. He's the villain who can't quite make anything stick, and there's pathos in that, and also comedy. And then he gets the remote. The remote is interesting because it didn't come from Rob. He found it. It fell off a passing truck in an almost casual, slapstick way. The universe handed Rob an instrument of almost unlimited power through random chance, because the narrative needed to give him something that could actually threaten the Wattersons. And Rob, who has been trying and failing to be a proper villain for so long, gets handed the tools to do it properly, and uses them immediately. What he does with them is precise. He doesn't blow anything up. He doesn't create monsters, or open portals, or conjure armies. He manipulates. He uses subtitles to put words in Gumball's mouth that Darwin takes as real. He turns off the emotional filters that keep Richard and Nicole's worst selves in check. He finds the places where the family structure is load-bearing and applies pressure there. Rob is very smart, actually. That's something the show establishes quietly, but clearly. He's been watching. He's been paying attention. He was a background character for 2 seasons before any of this. He had nothing to do but observe. And what he observed was the Wattersons' family dynamics, their pressure points, the things they don't say out loud but fear. He studied them the way someone studies something they can't be part of. The horror of the disaster is partly the horror of someone using intimate knowledge weaponously. The things Rob knows about this family, the insecurities, the unspoken fears, the fault lines, he knows because he watched them without them knowing he was watching. That's a very specific violation. Not physical, not obvious, but real. He has information he shouldn't have, and he's using it precisely because nobody thought to close the curtains. There's also something about the remote's rewind function that disturbs me in a way I haven't fully named. When Rob uses rewind to go back in time, the episode literally rewinds. Through its own title card, through the previous episode, through Cartoon Network bumpers, backward through the show's own history. The show is showing you its own machinery. It's showing you that rewinding is possible, that the whole structure of what you've been watching can be undone, that nothing is permanent. Horror often works by implying the permanence of damage, the scar that doesn't heal, the memory that won't leave. But the disaster and the rerun are doing something stranger. They're showing you that damage can be undone and suggesting that this is also disturbing. That the ability to rewind and try again doesn't mean anything gets better, necessarily. That sometimes you rewind and make it worse, and then you rewind again and make it worse again. And the fact that you can keep going back doesn't mean you'll ever find the version where it goes right. Gumball in The Rerun has full knowledge of what happened in the disaster. He knows every move Rob is going to make. He's been to the future. He should be able to prevent everything. And he makes it worse. He keeps making it worse. His interventions create problems he couldn't anticipate. His attempts to stop one thing trigger 3 others. The knowledge is not the solution. I think about that. About how knowing what's going to go wrong doesn't always help you stop it. About how you can have the complete information about a disaster and still not be able to prevent it. Because the disaster emerges from a web of causes too complex to untangle in real time. The remote gives you temporal power, but not the wisdom to use it well. And that's maybe the most realistic thing about the disaster, that power and wisdom are different things, and getting one doesn't give you the other. Here's something I keep circling back to about the Inquisition, and why the body horror in it works as well as it does. The show spent 6 seasons establishing what it means to be a character in Elmore, not just personality-wise, physically. Each character's body is a specific kind of thing made in a specific way. Masami is a cloud, which means she's soft and diffuse and capable of changing shape within certain limits. Terry is paper, which means she's flat and lightweight and has a relationship with drawing that no other character has. Banana Joe is a banana, which means he has a specific shape and specific structural logic, and his comedy often emerges from the incongruity between his banananess and his humanoid behavior. Tina is a dinosaur, massive, reptilian, 3D rendered while most other characters are 2D. All of these characters' bodies are, in a sense, their statements about what kind of thing they are. Their animation style is their identity made visible. You can look at a character in Elmore and know, from the visual register they belong to, something about what kind of being they are and what world they come from. When the superintendent starts transforming characters into humans, what he's taking away is precisely that. He's not just changing how they look. He's removing the statement their bodies make about what they are. He's replacing specificity with generality. All the different ways of being a character in Elmore, all the different visual traditions and styles and materials that coexist in that world, flattened into one. Everyone looks the same. Everyone is human. Everyone has the same kind of body. The horror of this isn't just aesthetic. It's about what uniformity costs. The diversity of the show's animation styles has always been, implicitly, an argument for the value of difference, for the idea that creatures who look completely unlike each other can share a world, share a school, share friendships and rivalries, and the ordinary texture of daily life. The superintendent's project is an argument for the opposite, and the show is very clear about which side it's on. The superintendent himself is live action, a filmed human being. He's not a cartoon. He's not drawn, not rendered, not made of paper or clay. He's real, in the sense of being actually photographed. And in the show's mixed media world, that makes him the most alien thing in it. He's not part of the tradition. He doesn't belong to any of the styles the show uses. He's the intrusion of something outside the show's visual grammar entirely, and that's where his menace comes from. Not from his power or his machines, but from the simple fact that he exists in a different register than everything else. The final irony, and the show really commits to it, is that Gumball and Darwin defeat him by doing cartoon things. By being so thoroughly, specifically, irreducibly cartoon, that the superintendent can't get a grip on them. Their weapon is their own nature. Their resistance is the act of being fully what they are. And the restored characters, turned back from human to cartoon by encounters with pure gumballness, snap back to themselves because they remember what they are. This is the show's most optimistic horror resolution. Most of the horror episodes leave things unresolved, leave the wrongness in place, refuse the comfort of easy catharsis. The Inquisition ends with a kind of affirmation that being fully yourself is a form of protection, that the specific and the particular and the stubbornly individual resist the kind of homogenizing force the superintendent represents. And then Rob falls into the void, and the affirmation gets complicated. Let me talk about the aesthetic of horror in children's media more broadly, because Gumball exists in a tradition, and I want to place it properly. Cartoon horror for children has a long history, going back to the earliest Disney films. Snow White's forest sequence, Fantasia's Night on Bald Mountain, the Pleasure Island transformation in Pinocchio. Children's animation has always had a relationship with genuine darkness. The Brothers Grimm stories that many fairy tales descend from are full of horror. Children's literature has always had teeth. Something about children, as an audience, seems to call for both comfort and genuine fear. The world is wonderful, and the world is terrifying. And here's a story about a world that is both at once. The horror that works in children's media is usually horror that maps onto real things children fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of not fitting in, fear of being different, fear of being forgotten, fear of the body changing without your consent. These are real fears, and children feel them intensely. And the best children's horror gives those fears a shape so they can be looked at, and if not resolved, at least recognized. Gumball is doing this. Every horror episode maps, under its fantastical surface, onto something emotionally real. The void is about being forgotten, being found boring and left behind, being the friend nobody really includes, whose absence nobody notices until someone specifically goes looking. Every child who has felt invisible in a group, who has felt like the background character, knows the specific fear that the void embodies. The nobody is about the desperation of wanting to matter. Rob hides in the main character's house because they're the main characters, the ones who matter, the ones the story follows. He wants to be included in something that means something. Every child who has sat on the outside of a group watching other people have adventures they can't access knows exactly what Rob's basement means. The joy is about the pressure to be happy in social situations. The joy virus spreads through physical contact and produces overwhelming compulsive happiness. The infected hug and smile and need to share their state with everyone around them. There is something in the terror of Miss Simeon's predicament, being the only person who doesn't feel what everyone around her feels, being the holdout against a contagious emotional state that everyone else seems fine with, that maps onto social anxiety in a very precise way. The night is about the secret inner life, the dreams nobody sees, the fears and fantasies that live in the hours when you're not performing your waking self. Every child understands that their dream life is private, is theirs alone, is the part of them nobody else has access to. The night takes that private space seriously and shows you what it looks like from the inside. The Inquisition is about conformity pressure, being told that what you are is wrong, being put through a process designed to make you more like everyone else, less like yourself, being asked to give up the thing that makes you specific. This is one of the central horrors of childhood and adolescence, the pressure to flatten yourself, to erase your edges, to fit the expected shape. The superintendent is that pressure made literal and given machines. Gumball earns its horror because it's doing real emotional work. It's not scaring you for the sake of scaring you. It's showing you something true about being alive and being young and being in a world that doesn't always make room for you. And it's using the language of horror because horror is sometimes the most honest language available. I want to revisit the dreams in the night one more time, because I was too quick with some of them, and I want to do them justice. Darwin's dream. It's not one of the most discussed, but it's one of the most affecting. Darwin dreams that he can breathe underwater without any problem, which, as a fish, is not normally something he can do. He lives on land, goes to school on land, has legs and lungs adapted for land dwelling. He's a fish who became capable of surface living, but the surface is where he's always had to be. In his dream, he can go back. He can go into the water and breathe it and be what he was before he was what he is now. It's presented as a happy dream, and it is. You can see the joy in it, but there's also something bittersweet in it. Something that the episode doesn't quite name, but that you can feel if you're paying attention. Darwin has adapted. He's become someone who belongs to a world that isn't the world he came from. And in his dreams, part of him goes back. Part of him still breathes underwater. Part of him is still entirely a fish. Every person who has left something behind, a home, a way of life, a version of themselves, knows what that dream is. The dream of going back and finding it still accessible. Finding the old self still there, waiting, still knowing how to do what it knew how to do. Darwin's dream is about origin and about what you carry forward from it, and it's in an episode about everyone's dreams. But Darwin's dream is the one about belonging to more than one world. Richard's dream, Gumball and Darwin's father, involves donuts. A lot of donuts. It's played as pure comedy. Richard being Richard, dreaming about his favorite food. But I think about it differently now. Richard is a character who is functionally the failure in his family. He's unemployed, he's not very bright, he's dependent on Nicole for everything from income to competence. His waking life is defined by inadequacy, and in his dream, he has perfect and unlimited access to the thing he loves most without any of the complications that come with it. No judgment, no Nicole telling him he's had enough, no consequence, just the thing he loves. That's not just comedy, that's what comfort dreams are. The pure, uncomplicated version of the thing that makes you feel safe, without the real world's friction around it. Richard's donut dream is the show being surprisingly tender, with a character it usually treats as a punchline. Nicole's dream is about winning, about competition and triumph, and being recognized as the best. She's a martial arts expert in the waking world, deeply capable and endlessly driven, the person who actually keeps the family functional. Her dream is being recognized for it, winning, triumphantly, being held up. She wakes up when she wins and looks satisfied. The moon watches all of this. Derek Jacobi's voice, measuring and gentle, narrates. And there's something profound about the moon's position, orbiting, observing, making no judgment, providing the light that makes the night navigable without being part of anything that happens in it. The moon is the show's most perfect observer. It sees everything. It says very little. It keeps the darkness from being total. Here's something I want to be honest about. I started this video thinking I could cover all of Gumball's horror episodes comprehensively and then explain the why of it. And I've realized partway through that, the why is slipping. Not because I don't understand it, but because the more I look at these episodes, the more the why multiplies. There isn't one reason the horror works. There are dozens. The mixed media, the character depth, the emotional honesty, the willingness to not resolve, the philosophical seriousness the show brought to its most absurd premises, the voice cast, the music, the writer's evident love for the show, and the world they built. Here's the thing about great art, and I'll call Gumball that without embarrassment. It doesn't do one thing well. It does everything well, and all the things it does well are talking to each other, amplifying each other, creating combinations you couldn't have predicted from any single element. The horror of the void wouldn't work without the mixed media aesthetic giving the void its visual texture. The horror of the nobody wouldn't work without the show's established logic of what it means to be a background character. The horror of the Inquisition wouldn't work without 6 seasons of establishing that each character's visual style is their identity. It all depends on everything else, which is, I think, the definition of a coherent fictional world. A world where the parts know about each other. And look, I know this is a video about horror, and I know it's supposed to be a go-to-sleep video, and those two things are in some tension with each other right now. I've been talking about disturbing things, and I've been doing it in a voice meant to relax you. But I think that's actually the right approach for Gumball, because Gumball itself holds those tensions. It's a comfort show that will sometimes put its hand on your shoulder and walk you to a cliff edge. It's a show made with love that will sometimes show you something genuinely frightening. It's a show about a cartoon cat that will sometimes make you think about erasure and identity and what it means to exist. The best thing about Gumball is that it doesn't apologize for any of this. It doesn't mark the horror episodes as different. It doesn't put a disclaimer at the start. It just does it with the full confidence that its audience can handle it. And its audience, kids mostly, at the time of original broadcast, handled it. They watched The Void, and The Joy, and The Night, and The Disaster, and they were fine. More than fine. They're the ones making videos about these episodes now. They're the ones who remember. Let me end with the thing I think is most important to say about Gumball's horror, and it's something I haven't said directly yet, even though it's been underneath everything I've said. The show trusts its audience. That sounds simple. It isn't. Most children's entertainment doesn't do this. Most children's entertainment explains. It labels. It tells you when to be scared and when to feel better. It manages the audience's emotional state with explicit cues. Scary music when things are scary. Bright music when things are resolved. Clear visual signals that distinguish threat from safety. Gumball doesn't manage you. It shows you things and lets you react to them. It shows you the void without telling you exactly how scared to be of it. It shows you Rob in the basement without a musical sting to flag that this is the reveal. It shows you Masami's face dissolving and trusts you to feel the horror of it without the show underscoring the horror explicitly. It shows you Carrie at the Halloween party, separate from the ghosts who all had lives she never had, and lets you arrive at the sadness of that on your own. This trust is what makes the Horrorland. When the show tells you how to feel, you feel what the show tells you to feel, and then you move on. When the show just shows you something and steps back, you feel what you feel, and then you keep feeling it, because there's no resolution signal to tell you it's okay to stop. The dreams in the night aren't resolved. The moon doesn't say, "Don't worry, these are just dreams. Everyone wakes up fine." The moon observes. The episode ends, and you carry those images. Daisy's dream, Carrie's nightmare, Darwin breathing underwater, Terry drawing on herself in her sleep. You carry them with you because the show never took them away from you. That's the move. That's the whole move. Give the audience something real. Step back and trust them to hold it. I mean, when you think about what Gumball was doing with The Void especially, there's something almost Borgesian about it. The idea of a place that receives mistakes. The idea that the universe has an active editorial function. That it curates itself. That it is always in the process of deciding what deserves to continue. And what gets quietly archived in the static. Borges wrote about libraries that contain all possible books. Labyrinths that contain all possible paths. Gardens where every moment is preserved and branching. The Void is the inverse. It's the place where all the moments that got cut live out their existence. The outtakes, the deleted scenes, the things that almost were. And the show implies that the Void is full. That there is so much in it, accumulated over the whole history of the world, that it has its own geography, its own topology, its own rules. Molly has been there for an entire season. Rob has been there long enough to change fundamentally. The Void isn't an empty nothing. It's a crowded everything. All the things that got erased, living on in the place the erasing sent them. That's philosophically rich in a way that most children's entertainment, most adult entertainment, if I'm being honest, doesn't attempt. The question of where mistakes go. The question of whether being a mistake is a permanent judgment or just a contextual one. Molly was a mistake because the world found her boring. But when Gumball looked for her, he didn't find her boring. He found her worth rescuing. The world's judgment wasn't final. It was just powerful. Rob was a mistake because he was a background character who didn't serve any narrative function. But he escaped, and he found a function. He became a villain, became a nemesis, became a character with an arc, and a motivation, and a coherent relationship to the show's protagonist. He made himself necessary. The world's judgment wasn't final for him either, just powerful. What the show is saying, I think, through The Void and through everything else, is that the judgment that you're unnecessary is a judgment, not a fact. It can be wrong. It can be overturned. The work of overturning it is hard, and it changes you, and it sometimes leaves marks that glow in the dark. But it's possible. Rob made it possible. For a while, right until the last episode. Here's a thought I want to leave you with before I actually let you sleep this time. The show's most persistent horror is the horror of impermanence. Things disappear, people get forgotten, eras end, shows end. The world makes its judgments and files its paperwork and moves on. And most of the time, nobody notices the gap. Most of the time, the fold in the world where something used to be seals itself over so completely that there's no evidence anything was ever there. And Gumball was honest about this. The show that built a cosmological horror premise around exactly this kind of impermanence was also, itself, impermanent. It aired for 8 years, it ended, and then the credits rolled and Elmore went quiet. But here's the thing about the Void's logic that the show might not have fully considered. The Void takes things that the world decides are mistakes, that the world finds unnecessary, that the world chooses to forget. The Void operates on collective indifference. And if enough people remember something, if enough people care about it, talk about it, make videos about it in the small hours of the night for other people who can't sleep, then maybe the world's judgment gets complicated. Maybe the forgetting doesn't fully happen. Maybe there's a version of the tinfoil hat that's made out of people talking. I've been talking about Gumball for a while now, and you've been listening, or half listening, or letting the words carry you somewhere quiet. And maybe that matters. Maybe the act of paying attention to something, of spending time with it, of thinking carefully about what it was doing and why it worked and what it meant, is a form of keeping it real. A form of insisting it continues to exist. A form of saying, I remember you. I know what you were. I'm not going to let the fold close completely. Maybe that's sentimental. Probably it is. But I think about Rob building his whole existence on the need to be seen. And I think about Molly waiting in the gray static for someone to look for her. And I think about Carrie at the party for the dead, watching the other ghosts have something she can never have. And I don't want to be the person who lets the fold close. So I keep talking, and you keep listening, and Elmore stays a little more real. One last thing. Genuinely, the last thing. The Inquisition ends with Rob falling into the void, and the show ends there. We never find out if he's okay. We never find out if anyone goes after him. We don't know if the void is where he stays, or if he finds another way out. The way he did the first time. I think about that. I think about Rob finding the exit the first time. Finding the way out of nowhere. Of non-existence. Clinging to the main character's story until he could make himself part of it. I think about whether he could do it again. Whether someone who escaped the void once has something in them that makes it possible to escape it again. Whether the static on his skin is a map of where he's been, or whether it's a compass for finding the way back out. We don't know. The show doesn't tell us. The show ends, and that question hangs. And questions that hang are the best kind. Not because they're comfortable, they're not. But because they stay open. Because they mean the story isn't finished. Because as long as you're still wondering about Rob, he's still somewhere being wondered about. And a character that someone is wondering about is not a character that has been fully erased. So wonder about him. Let the question be there when you close your eyes. That's what I want to leave you with. Not an answer. Just the open question. Sitting with you in the dark. Keeping you company. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. Extended section. Additional observations. Let me keep going a little longer, because there are things I haven't said yet, and the night is still young enough for them. I want to talk about something structural in the way Gumball handles horror, specifically the way horror and comedy share the same tone in these episodes, and why that combination is more destabilizing than either one alone would be. The conventional wisdom about mixing horror and comedy is that the comedy undercuts the horror. You get scared, and then you laugh. And the laughter releases the tension. It's the way a lot of horror comedies work. The comedy is essentially a safety valve, a way of managing the audience's fear so they don't actually tip over into being too uncomfortable. The jokes protect you. Gumball inverts this. In Gumball, the horror doesn't undercut the comedy. The comedy undercuts you. You're laughing, and then the thing happens. And your laughter doesn't protect you at all. In fact, it makes it worse. Because you were open. You were relaxed. You had your guard down because the show was being funny. and then it handed you something deeply wrong, and you received it in an unguarded state that you wouldn't have been in if the show had been signaling danger. This is the banana peel of narrative technique applied to emotional experience. You're walking along fine, and then the floor is gone. Look at the joy, the setup. Gumball and Darwin arriving at school on a Monday in a state of pure, radiant happiness is comedy. The joke is that this is weird and inappropriate. Monday happiness is an affront. Miss Simeon's reaction to them is funny. The early moments of joy spread are funny. And then the found footage format clicks in, and you realize this isn't actually a gag. And Miss Simeon is genuinely alone in an infected building, and the horror is real. But you got there through laughter. The laughter was the on-ramp. Look at the nobody, the missing socks, the eating of half the leftovers, the mysterious rearrangement of objects. These are presented as comedy for most of the episode. The Watersons are baffled in a funny way. The investigation is funny. And then the basement opens, and Rob is standing there, lit from below, his TV static skin glowing in the half-light. And the comedy hasn't gone away, but the horror has arrived alongside it, and now both things are true simultaneously. This is tonally very hard to do. Most shows can't hold comedy and horror in the same frame. Gumball does it constantly, and it does it because the show's fundamental premise, cartoon characters with real emotional lives in a mixed media world, is already holding two incompatible things in the same frame at all times. The training wheels have been on for the whole show. By the time you hit the horror episodes, you've already been conditioned to accept that incompatible things can be true simultaneously. I should say something about the music in these episodes, because it's doing a lot of work that goes unmentioned. The Gumball composers, the show had several over the course of its run, had a gift for knowing when to be quiet. Horror music is a whole language, but the most effective horror doesn't always use a full vocabulary of it. The most effective horror music is often absence, silence, where you expected sound, the score dropping out at exactly the wrong moment, leaving you alone with the image. The void uses a string motif that appears whenever the void is close, or when Rob's static marked body appears. It's spare and slightly wrong. Not dissonant exactly, but off-center. Not the kind of music that signals danger directly, but the kind that makes you feel that the room is slightly colder than it should be. The kind of music that makes you aware that something in the air has changed. The Night uses the absence of music for most of its runtime. Derek Jacobi's narration runs over mostly quiet backgrounds, with the occasional musical gesture for specific dream sequences. The silence makes the narration feel more intimate, more like someone speaking directly to you in a dark room, and more like you are actually alone with the things being described. There's no score to tell you how to feel about the dreams you're witnessing, just the voice and the images and whatever you bring to them. The Disaster has one of the most effective musical choices in the show's run. The moment where Rob uses the rewind function and the episode literally plays itself backward, including the soundtrack. The music plays in reverse. The dialogue plays in reverse. The entire sound design reverses. And it creates this profound wrongness. This sense of time unhinging that no amount of visual cleverness alone could achieve. Sound is temporal in a way vision isn't. We experience sound as existing in time, as happening in sequence. And when the sequence reverses, something in the ear tells the brain that this is deeply wrong in a way that goes below thought. I want to talk about Carrie's character arc through the horror episodes, because it's one of the most sustained uses of a single character as a horror lens in the show. Carrie appears in The Ghost as the first episode to center her. She borrows Gumball's body to eat food. The horror of this is the body possession horror. Someone else in your physical self, using it without full consent. That's Carrie's introduction. She reappears in Halloween as the guide and hostess, the one who navigates between worlds, who knows the rules of both. In this episode, she's not the horror, but the expert. The character who understands the frightening landscape and can explain it. She's shifted from subject of horror to guide through it. In The Night, she's a subject of horror again, but in a different register. Her nightmare, being trapped in color, in warmth, in joy, is a nightmare that only she could have. It's the inverse of the nightmare most people would fear. Being a ghost means her comfort zone is darkness and cold and absence. The thing that nightmares are made of for most people, emptiness, gray, formlessness, is Carrie's home. What haunts her is the positive. What she cannot bear is the warmth. There's something philosophically interesting in this. Horror often works by inverting comfort into discomfort, by taking the things that are supposed to be safe, home, warmth, familiar faces, daylight, and making them threatening. It's the uncanny again, the familiar becoming frightening. Carrie is a character for whom this inversion is already complete. Her resting state is the thing that's supposed to be the nightmare. So her nightmare has to be the thing that's supposed to be the comfort. And this raises a question the show never answers directly. Does Carrie want to be different? Does she want warmth? Does she want to eat food without borrowing someone's body? Does she want to be in the sunlight without it being wrong for her? The nightmare could be read either way, as Carrie's fear of being in a state she can't access, or as Carrie's disgust at a state she doesn't want, but is threatened by being forced into. We don't know. The dream is ambiguous in the way real dreams are ambiguous. I find Carrie's story more affecting than almost any other characters in the show, because she's the character most defined by a permanent condition, rather than temporary circumstances. Gumball has bad days. Darwin has bad days. Even Rob had good days before the void, and might someday again. Carrie's state is what she is. She's not going through something. She is something. And that something is defined by limitation. She loves the people around her. She wants the things they have. And she can't have them. And she's known this her whole existence. And she navigates it with a dark humor and a dry wit that you recognize as the coping mechanism of someone who figured out a long time ago that the alternative to dark humor was despair. I said earlier that the horror in these episodes often doesn't resolve. And I want to come back to that and be more precise about it, because it's not exactly that the horror doesn't resolve. Some episodes do resolve their horror pretty completely. The Joy ends with the Joy virus cured and everyone back to normal. Halloween ends with the kids return to their bodies and the danger past. What doesn't resolve is the implication, the thing the horror reveals about the world, or about the characters, or about the nature of existence in Elmore, that stays. The Joy virus gets cured, but the found footage document of it exists somewhere. Halloween ends, but Carrie's permanent position outside the world of the living remains. The ghost resolves Carrie's specific food crisis, but the structural unfairness of her existence, that she can't experience the physical world directly, that she needs a borrowed body for anything that involves sensation, is exactly where it was at the start. The episodes that are most genuinely unresolved are the ones dealing with the void and with Rob, and I think this is intentional. The void represents the show's darkest philosophical premise, that the universe actively culls what it considers unnecessary, and there's no resolution for that premise, because the resolution would have to be the universe stops doing this, which is not a promise the show can make. The void is still there. It still operates. It took the memories of the people who discovered it, which means nobody in Elmore is equipped to resist it, and it's still quietly erasing things in the background of every episode. Rob is unresolved because Rob's story is about a kind of injustice that doesn't have a clean answer. He was thrown away. He survived. He made himself matter, and then at the end, he was thrown away again. The arc completes, but not satisfyingly. You watch Rob fall into the void, and you feel something that isn't quite grief, isn't quite horror, isn't quite relief, and isn't quite satisfaction. It's the feeling of a story that ends the way stories sometimes end in real life. Not with the resolution you wanted, but with the truth of what the story actually was. I want to tell you about a visual moment in The Void that I think is the scariest single image the show ever put on screen. And it's not the void itself. It's the gap. The gap where Molly used to be. When Gumball, Darwin, and Mr. Small go to look for Molly, they go to where her treehouse should be. And there's no treehouse. There's no empty lot. There's no sign of demolition or absence. There's just a gap. A fold in the visual space of Elmore, where the world has sealed itself over the place where Molly and her treehouse used to exist. It's not that something is missing. It's that the missing thing has been so thoroughly removed that even the space for it is gone. The show represents this as literally a fold in the background. The photographic real-world backdrop crinkled and sealed, like a piece of paper folded over a spot. And Gumball and Darwin pry this fold open. With their cartoon hands, they pry apart the real-world background. They reach into the seam between existence and its own erasure and pull it open. This is the show being explicit about what it is: a cartoon existing in photographs of real space, and using that self-awareness as a horror mechanism. The background of the show, the real photographic world that the cartoon characters exist in front of, is also the surface of reality in the show's universe. And reality has been folded over to cover up a mistake, and the cartoon characters can reach into the fold because they're cartoon characters, because the rules don't apply to them the same way, and pull it open. The visual wrongness of this, cartoon hands in real photographic space, folding and prying open the backdrop itself, is deeply effective because it's so specific to Gumball. No other show could do this. Only a show that exists in the exact intersection of the real and the drawn can use that intersection as a physical location characters can interact with. Let me be honest about something. I've been talking about these episodes as if I'm analyzing them from a comfortable analytical distance, and the truth is, I'm not fully comfortable. I've been sitting here thinking about the void, and about Rob falling into it, and about Carrie never being able to eat anything, and about the Anais dream where Daisy turns to the camera to tell you that the torture was her fantasy. And these things don't land lightly. They didn't when I first watched them, and they don't now. That's the thing about good horror. You don't process it once and put it down. It keeps coming back. The images cycle. The questions resurface. You're doing something unrelated, and suddenly you're thinking about the fold in the world where Molly's treehouse used to be. And you're wondering what other folds there are. Whether there are gaps in your own memory where something used to be that the world quietly decided wasn't necessary anymore. I mean, there might be. Probably there are. There are people from your past whose faces you can't quite recall anymore, whose voices have gone quiet in your memory, who the daily act of living has slowly, gently pushed to the edge and then over it. That's not the void doing it, obviously. That's just how memory works, how time works, how we move through our lives with finite capacity for holding on to everything. But the feeling the void episode is reaching for, the specific quality of that forgetting, the way an absence can become so complete that you forget there was ever a presence, that's real. That's something you know from your actual life. And Gumball found a way to make that feeling into a plot, to give it a place, and a logic, and a character who lived inside it. That's what I mean when I say the horror is doing real emotional work. It's not inventing fears. It's finding forms for fears you already carry. The question I keep coming back to, because questions that keep coming back to you are usually trying to tell you something, is this: what is Gumball's attitude toward its own darkness? Because there's a version of what I've been describing that's pessimistic. The void erases things and wins in the end. Rob falls into the void. The show ends without resolving its darkest premise. Nobody in Elmore ever gets to really know what the void is, because the memory of it keeps getting wiped. The horror is real, and it persists, and the comedy doesn't undo it. But there's another version that's something else, that sees all the same things, and arrives somewhere different. The characters in Gumball keep going, not in the inspirational, teeth-gritted, overcoming adversity way that certain kinds of storytelling demand. They just keep going in the ordinary, day-to-day, stumbling through it way that life actually is. Gumball makes bad decisions and learns from some of them. Darwin tries too hard to be kind and sometimes succeeds. Rob builds an entire identity out of wanting to matter and doesn't stop wanting it, even when it costs him everything. Carrie is dry and funny and present, navigating her permanent limitation with a wit that suggests she's made some kind of peace with it, or at least a workable truce. None of these characters are winning. Exactly. None of them have solved anything. The void is still there. The show's darkest premises are still operative. But the characters persist in spite of this, which is not a victory, but is also not nothing. I think the show's attitude toward its own darkness is, it's real, and it doesn't go away, and you go on anyway. Not because things get better, but because going on is the only option that doesn't involve stopping. The characters in Gumball survive the horror of their world by being stubborn about existing, by refusing to be background, by refusing to be forgotten, by being so fully and specifically themselves that the universe has a harder time filing them under mistakes. That's the message under the horror. Not it's okay, and not it isn't okay. More like, it's the situation. Here we are. Keep going. Let me say one more thing about the show's use of horror in the context of the show's ending, because I think the ending is doing something that most people haven't fully articulated. The Inquisition is the last episode, the finale, and the show chose to end on a horror note, on body horror, on transformation, on the void consuming everything. This is not the ending you'd expect from a comedy show. You'd expect something celebratory, something conclusive, something that gathers the cast and lets them say goodbye. Instead, the show ends with an invasion, a transformation, a rescue, a confrontation, and then Rob falling into the gray. I think the show ended this way because it was honest. Because the world it had built, the world where the void exists and erases things and takes the memory of what it erased, is a world where endings aren't clean, where things stop, not because they've been resolved, but because they stop, where the last image isn't a bow, but a fall. The show was always going to end. All shows end. And Gumball, having spent 6 seasons building a universe with a place called the Void, where things go when they're over, had to be honest about what that meant for itself. The show is ending. Elmore is being consumed. The Void is claiming what it claims. And in the middle of that, Rob falls. And the last thing we see is the hole. Not a resolution. A hole. That's not pessimism, though. That's honesty about the shape of endings. And honesty, in art, even when it's uncomfortable, maybe especially when it's uncomfortable, is a form of respect. The show respected its audience enough to end truthfully. The night is deep. Wherever you are, if you've been listening all this way, you're probably in bed. Maybe the lamp is still on. Maybe the screen is glowing faintly. Maybe you're already half asleep, and these words are just texture now. The shape of language without the content. The rhythm of a voice in the dark. That's fine. That's good, actually. That's the whole point of this. I want to leave Gumball here, in the quiet. Leave it with all its horror and all its heart. Leave Carrie at the edge of the world she can never quite enter. Leave Molly not in the void, but back in Elmore, with her treehouse returned. Leave Darwin breathing underwater in his dream. Leave Miss Simeon with her documentary safely filed somewhere. Leave the Watersons' basement exactly where it is, known about now, the secret out. Leave the remote destroyed in Rob's hands, the rewind impossible, the damage done and being repaired. Leave Rob falling, and leave the question open, whether he lands somewhere, whether there's a way out he already knows. Leave it open. That's where the best stories live. Not in the answers, but in the space between the question and whatever comes next. That space is yours. It's the space where you think about it at 3 a.m, or while you're in the shower, or when the show comes up in conversation and you start talking and realize you're saying things you didn't know you thought. The void takes what the world forgets. So don't forget. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. Actually, one more thing. I know I keep saying that and then not stopping. And I know that's its own kind of funny. But there's one more episode I want to circle back to before I let this go completely. And that's the Aeneas nightmare from The Night, because I feel like I haven't been fully fair to it. And I want to be. Aeneas Watterson is 4 years old. She is, by every measurable standard in the show, the most intelligent member of her family, and arguably of her school. She figures things out faster than anyone. She sees the angles. She has almost no patience for stupidity, which means she has almost no patience for her family most of the time. And this creates a constant low-level friction in her life. She is surrounded by people she loves deeply and finds perpetually maddening. Her nightmare is Daisy the donkey. Daisy is her stuffed animal, the stuffed animal she sleeps with, the soft object that represents comfort and childhood, and the soft animal of one's own loving. The stuffed animal is the comfort object. It's supposed to be safe. It's the thing you hold when you're scared. And in Aeneas's dream, Daisy is the nightmare. Daisy is huge and alive and dominant, and Aeneas is the toy. And Daisy tortures her throughout the dream with the kind of gleeful, cheerful, relentless cruelty that only dreams can sustain. And then, the turn, Daisy reveals that this is her dream. Not Aeneas's nightmare from the outside. Daisy's fantasy from the inside. Daisy has been dreaming this Think about what you hold when you go to sleep. Think about the soft things, the comfort things, the objects that represent safety in the dark. And now, think about those objects as beings with inner lives, with desires, with dreams of their own that run while you're sleeping, with fantasies that you have absolutely no knowledge of and no ability to access. The horror of Anaïs's dream sequence is the horror of the uncanny in its purest form. The comfort object is the nightmare. The thing that was supposed to protect you is the thing that wants something from you. And you didn't know. You held it close every night, and you didn't know. This is also, I think, a very specific and very real thing about intelligent children. And Anaïs is the show's most explicitly intelligent child, which is the way that intelligence creates a peculiar loneliness. You're the smartest person in most rooms. You see things others miss. You understand the angles. And sometimes this means you also understand things that aren't pleasant to understand, that most people in the room are happily ignorant of. You can't turn it off. The understanding is the thing you are. Anaïs's nightmare isn't just about Daisy. It's about being the one who knows. About being inside the head of something, your own sleeping brain, that is smarter than the situation calls for. About your own consciousness, turning against the comfort you've carefully arranged. The nightmare isn't Daisy. The nightmare is Anaïs's own mind, doing what it does, finding the angle, understanding the thing nobody was supposed to understand. That's a dream that only Anaïs could have. That specificity, the way each character's nightmare is tailored to what makes them themselves, is the show at its most precise. And it's horrifying in exactly the way it means to be. I keep thinking about what it means that the moon is the narrator of the night, not a person, not a character we know, not even a named figure from the show's regular cast. The moon, a celestial object, the thing that reflects light without generating it, the thing that governs tides, the thing that every culture throughout history has looked up at and felt, in some hard-to-articulate way, watched by. Derek Jacobi's voice gives the moon a quality of patient, ancient observation. This is not a being that was born and will die. This is a being that was there before Elmore was Elmore, before any of these characters existed, before cartoons were invented, before mixed media animation was a concept someone could think of. The moon has been watching dreams for as long as there have been sleeping things to dream, and what it has learned, presumably, is that the dreams are always this strange. That the inner lives of sleeping creatures have always been exactly this complicated, and frightening, and funny, and sad. There's comfort in that, strangely, in the idea of something that has seen all of this before, that the specific shape of your private fear is familiar to the moon, not because the moon knows you specifically, but because it has watched this many times over. Your nightmare is yours, but also, in some sense, part of a vast library of nightmares that the moon has been cataloging since the beginning of sleep. You are not alone in your strangeness. The moon has seen stranger. That's not a solution. It's not a resolution. But it's the thing the night offers at the end of everything it shows you. This sense of being observed by something old and patient and non-judgmental. Something that watches dreams and notes them and moves on, without verdict, without intervention, simply present. Sleep is like that, when it's good. The sense of being witnessed without being judged, of laying down the performance of waking life and just being whatever the dark hour makes of you. The moon sees all of it. Every Elmore resident dreaming every strange dream, every fear and every longing and every fragment of experience that the waking mind doesn't have room for. It watches. It continues. It is there when you wake and still there when you sleep again. And if the void is real, if there's some version of the void that operates in our world, some mechanism by which things that are no longer paid attention to drift slowly into a gray static nothing, then the moon is the thing that resists it, quietly, just by watching, just by being present. The moon doesn't fight the void. It doesn't argue with it. It simply remains, night after night, attending to the sleeping things below, keeping the count of what exists. I think about all the characters in Elmore who have been cataloged across these episodes. All the dreams, all the nightmares, all the private hours. Gumball falling from space and hitting himself on the way down, waking up just before impact. Darwin breathing underwater in the clean dark. Aeneas and Daisy at the center of a power dynamic that runs deeper than the waking world knows. Mr. Small in his confined space. Mr. Small, who speaks to crystals and incense and the universe, but is revealed to be just as trapped and afraid as anyone. Carrie in her warm-colored nightmare. Her ghost form pressed against the light she can never quite enter. Richard dreaming of donuts, with the pure, unguarded joy of someone who asks for very little. And the moon watches all of them. The moon holds all of them. Not because it chose to, not because it loves them specifically, but because it is there. And what is there gets watched. And what gets watched stays real. I think that's the deepest thing Gumball has to say. Not through its horror, not through its comedy, but in the moment between them. In the gentle, late-night observation of the night. The deepest thing it has to say is, you are here. You are sleeping. I see you. That's enough to keep you real for one more night. Sleep well. The moon is watching. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. End of script.